Chapter 6: The Spinal Cord and Brain. You've got a lot of nerves. Really, you do. You have nerves in your fingers. You have nerves in your toes. There are nerves all over your body. But there are two parts of your body that are especially important for your nervous system. One is the spinal cord. The other is your brain. I told you a little about your spinal cord earlier when we were looking at the skeletal system. I told you that the bones that make up your spine, the vertebrae, are there to protect your spinal cord. The vertebrae are hollow, and long strings of nerves run through those hollow parts of the bones. The nerves that make up your spinal cord run all the way up your back and your neck, and they end up in the brain. If you were to have a serious accident and damage your spinal cord, that could be a very bad thing. You might end up paralyzed, unable to move legs or arms. You might need a wheelchair to get around, like the boy in this photograph. You see, the brain uses the spinal cord as a sort of superhighway to send messages out to the rest of the body. If the spinal cord is broken or damaged, the messages can't get through to the arms and legs. The spinal cord leads right to the center of your nervous system, your brain. It's the brain that receives messages from the nerves. It's the brain that sends messages out to your muscles. Even though the brain weighs only 2 to 3 pounds, it is the most important organ for life. The brain is protected by the skull, and inside the skull there are 3 layers of fiber and fluid protecting the brain. So the brain is really well protected, but it can still be harmed. Ask a football player who's had a concussion. Getting a concussion is like bruising the brain. Ouch! The brain is divided into 3 main parts: the medulla, the cerebellum, and the cerebrum. Each part has its own job to do. The medulla, or brainstem, is located at the base of the skull in the back, right where the spinal cord meets the brain. The medulla controls the important involuntary actions of the body, like breathing, heartbeat, and digestion. The cerebellum sits right next to the medulla. It is divided into 2 hemispheres or halves. The cerebellum has several jobs. One of them is to control voluntary movements. That means the cerebellum helps you to walk, run, and jump. The 2 hemispheres of the cerebellum control different parts of the body. The right hemisphere controls movement on the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere controls movement on the right side of the body. It might seem strange that the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, but that's just the way we're made. The third part of the cerebrum, the third part of the brain is the cerebrum. The cerebrum sits on top of the cerebellum and the medulla. It is the largest part of the brain. Each part of the cerebrum has a certain job to do. For example, the front part, just inside your forehead, controls the emotions. And the very back part, just above your brain stem, controls the sense of sight. The sense of touch is controlled by a strip of the brain running over the top of your head from ear to ear. The outside part of the cerebrum is called the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is the wrinkly part of the brain that most people think about when they think of a brain. People sometimes call this part of the brain the gray matter. The cerebrum is divided into 2 hemispheres, just like the cerebellum. Until recently, we did not know much about what the various parts of the cerebrum do, but in the past few decades, we have learned a lot. Scientists now have more advanced ways than just X-rays to look at and observe different organs in the body, including the brain. They sometimes use a PET scan to see the different parts of the brain work. A scientist may ask the person having the PET scan to do something like talk or blink his or her eyes. When the person performs those different actions, different parts of the brain light up on the computer screen. Scientists have learned a lot about what happens where in the brain by looking at those PET scans. As you can see from this image of the brain, some of the things we do takes place on the left hemisphere, and others take place on the right hemisphere. So if we're doing science and math, we're using the left side of our brain. But if we're playing music, we're using the right hand or the right side of the brain. So which side of the brain are you most controlled with? Are you more controlled by the left side of the brain? Or are you more controlled by your right side of the brain?